Have you ever thought about whether or not we are alone in the universe? Many people have thought that it would be foolish for us to think that we are alone when you consider the amount of stars there are in our galaxy alone and how many planets would be in the same situation or that we're in. And then when you consider how many galaxies there are, it'd be really kind of foolish to think that we would be the only life forms amongst all of this. It's fascinating and interesting to speculate. What if there are other places like us, like ours? And if there are other places like this planet, do they too have people like us who are supposed to be the guardians of the planet? Which is what I believe we're supposed to be. And if other planets are just like us, and they have guardians, I wonder how many of them are experiencing the same type of problems that we have. I'm thinking it's pretty common. I wonder how many of them have experienced the fall as we have experienced. And of course, you can't help but wonder why it happened. Well, I've thought about this before, and in fact, in my previous video, I touched on this briefly, which is why I'm doing this video, because I went back and looked at some of my ideas I thought of a couple years ago. And I'd come up with 5 main groups based on whether or not a catastrophe was involved in this process. Because we're not really sure why we did what we did. We don't know why we opted out of nature. We don't know why we started spoiling our food. We don't know why we altered our food. We don't know why we damaged it and destroyed it. We don't know why we cooked it. We're not sure if it was a catastrophe or curiosity or what. But if we just consider the possibility that it was a catastrophe, how many different groups of guardians would there be in our universe? Well, I came up with a total of 5 that are in 2 main groups. The first group has 2, second group has 3. The first main group of planets with guardians on them would be those that never had to deal with any type of catastrophe that was so overwhelming that it made them have to do something drastic to survive, and that is to eat unnatural food. Not one of these planets experienced that. But just for argument's sake, let's say that some of them never decided to damage their food and alter their food, and some did. And for argument's sake, let's just say that in this group here, 200 altogether, 100 of them never had a catastrophe that was so devastating that they had to cook their food. And another 100 of them, they never had a catastrophe either, but for some reason they did cook their food. And then we've got the other group of planets. And they did have a catastrophe that was so devastating. They had no choice. To survive, they had to adapt. They had to become opportunistic feeders and eaters and eat something that they weren't meant to eat, even if it was their own kind. We adapt or we perish. We die. And if that happened to them, I've got 3 groups there. One group, they did it. They adapted, but when conditions returned, they returned. They adapted once again, and they went back to paradise, where they didn't have those problems that were within their control. Or in this case, if it was a catastrophe, it was outside their control. But if that happened to them, and then they had to adapt, now they got a problem that kind of was within their control, meaning that if conditions change, they can change again. That's why it's within our control. And then in the other 2 situations, one group of guys, they adapted. They started cooking their food, but they couldn't get back to paradise. And they're still cooking their food. And that's where we are. It's exactly where we are amongst the 5 groups I'm just mentioning. But there's one more group, possibly. And I don't know, I'm just kind of thinking, what are the possibilities? And that group would be those that had that horrible catastrophe, but they didn't start cooking their food because they found a better way. They figured out how not to be or how not to eat unnatural food to survive, they figured out a better way. And of course, who knows if that possibility even exists. But again, I'm just trying to kicking the idea around because I like to think about these things, because I wonder about these things. I wonder whether or not this is such a common problem throughout the universe that it's almost contagious. Why did we start cooking our food? Because the vast majority of you guys out there are doing it. You're influencing us because we're all one. Remember, I mentioned this in my last video, my previous video to this. Our community. It's not just local. It's not just global. It's not just in this galaxy. It's the whole universe. We're all one. Remember, at one time, all the energy in this universe could fit in something the size of a green pea. They call that zero-point energy. Formless energy that stepped down a level and became formed energy, tachyon energy. And that's what we see now in our universe. Vibrating energy everywhere. That all comes from that little green pea. Now, it's not hard to think about something, and this is bigger than a green pea, obviously, but it's not hard to think of something that size and something at the top communicating to something on the bottom. But then you expand that green pea into the universe that's full of billions of galaxies. My God, you can't even comprehend the distance between the two. But the point here is we're all still one. We're all connected. Separateness is an illusion. It's all vibrating energy. If we could zap away all the space, we'd all zap back down to that little bitty green pea again. At least that's how I like to think of it. That's the best version I've heard yet, and I'm going with that one. If it's not true, big deal. Fun to entertain these ideas, isn't it? But the point I'm trying to make here, and I've made this before using this analogy, is that when that formless energy stepped down a level and started vibrating, light was emitted. And those are the biophotons. The biophotons I speak of all the time. It's faster than the speed of light. It's coherent sunlight energy. It ties into an experiment that Einstein did with two other guys, who probably did all the other work, called the EPR paradox, where they proved that faster than light communication exists, and that experiment's been duplicated many times. Quantum physicists know that simple observation changes the spin of what we look at. That's why they know we live in a world that responds to our thoughts. And when you look at a subatomic particle, just absorbing it changes its spin. It knows it's being observed. Split that particle up a great distance, absorb this one, the other one changes spin the same time. There's no time lapse. So that's the point here. We are all one. Whatever's happening out there on other planets, if they exist, I'm sure is the same type of hell we're going through. And I'm sure some of them got back, and I'm sure some of them it finally was they're doing. And that's kind of, I think, where we're at. We're in that group where we can go back to paradise. We can stop destroying those biophotons, which makes us feel disconnected. And quit getting lost looking at what comes before what we did and what we got after we did. We got to look at what we're doing. That's what all my last several videos are going over. Because we got to focus on that second stage of knowledge, our actions, our lifestyle choices. Don't get tricked with spiritual mumbo jumbo about blaming intentions or blaming the angels, or even blaming the guardians on the other planets, or whatever you want to blame it on. Because we have to take responsibility in the second stage of knowledge. Thoughts, actions, reactions. It's our actions that matter. Oh, but John, something comes before the actions. I know. God. But John, you're just not enlightened, man. You don't know about what's happening before the action. I do. But we're getting hoodwinked every time they take our attention off what we're doing. Had a conversation with a guy last night. And it's really a challenge when people only listen to respond as opposed to listen to understand. And you can spot it when it happens, and I'm calling people on it. Damn it, I'm tired of people interrupting me when I haven't even finished my point, only because they heard something. Oh, I know about that. I can talk about this. And the thing about my conversation last night is that I kept telling this guy, look, I already know everything you're going to tell me. You don't know anything I'm going to tell you. Why do you keep interrupting me? You never heard my story. I've heard your story. I'm telling you my story. Why do you interrupt me and say, oh, but my story is this? I already know your story. And it tricks you and fools you, and it fools you to stop looking at what you got. In fact, every time I mentioned the word diet, that guy changed the subject. I finally, at the very end, I had to walk away because I was running late. I said, look, man, you're in denial. Every time I mentioned anything about diet, you immediately change the subject because you don't want to talk about it because your dietary mistakes are recorded in your flesh. I told him about Tolstoy. He was coming on to be being religious and the fall of mankind and the tree of knowledge and all this stuff, and I was trying to explain to him, look, I already know your version. I'm telling you there's some flaws in it. It doesn't give you anything that you can work with and correct. And I was telling him about Tolstoy and how he wanted to be more known for his religious views than he did his other works. You know, War and Peace and Anna Karenina, one of the most famous men in history. But he wrote that powerful essay, I'll put a link down below, The First Step to Paradise, where he wrote a 25-page essay to the great book, The Ethics of Diet by Howard Williams, translated that book into Russian, wrote a 25-page essay as the foreword to that book, and it's called The First Step. He talks about self-control, self-renunciation, and how the flaw with Christians is they focus on the higher virtues, not realizing you can't skip the steps when you're going from the first floor to the second floor of a house. You've got to start with the first step. First step, self-control. In the Bible, self-renunciation. And what does it have to do with? Gluttony. Your dietary mistakes are recorded in your flesh. Why do you think we started wearing clothes? It wasn't to hide our genitals. It was to hide our dietary mistakes. Because it's obvious when you eat the wrong food. Get a serpent in your belly. We're tricked and fooled by some really tricky people. They know how to manipulate us. They know how to infiltrate belief systems and just tweak something here and there to keep us confused, to keep us not taking responsibility. And I've said this many times and done a video series on it. I need to probably update this one and go a little bit further on it, is that we have to evaluate our belief system, especially when any belief will take away our responsibility. If someone says you're born this way, there's nothing you can do about it, they're taking away your responsibility. It happens all the time. We can't let that happen. We have to question everything. And there's only one way to question what I say. You got to test an idea as time has come. You got to accept the mission on the hero's journey. You got to prove it to yourself that you got a serpent in your belly. Your biophoton levels are so low, you just don't feel right. Something's wrong. And what do? You turn to the wrong food or sex or drugs or money or relationships or something to fill that void, not realizing that uneasy feeling is coming because you're disconnected and you're full of crap, literally. Isn't that amazing? The warm, fuzzy feeling we're searching for is to be clean and pure with lots of this coherent sunlight energy in us so we can communicate and feel the oneness of being inside that little green pea with a bunch of space and vibrating energy inside of it. And the one thing I'll say about my belief system, a lot of people might want to argue about how everything started, and I have no problem with that. In fact, I can take that part of my story, just throw it out. It doesn't make any difference. It's just entertaining to wonder and ponder whether or not there's a meaning to all this, right? What is the meaning to all this? You can't help but scratch your head. And then to try to figure out how it all happened and come up with one explanation, it's beyond me. I know a lot of people think they have the answers. But that's kind of what happens. A lot of people are real certain about some things, and not all of it's going to be true. You know, I mentioned before how powerful it is to understand the connectedness of everything. In a world with all of us having low biophoton levels, we find lots of comfort within the religions and the spiritual works. And we can use those as long as we have to understand they're not perfect. And I know some of y'all are not I hate to use the word evolved, but if there are stages through spirituality as we grow spiritually, if you're at a certain point, gray areas are tough. I understand that. Some of y'all really need the black and white. You don't understand metaphors. And if that's where you're at, someone like me is going to be kind of threatening to you. At least that's the conclusion M. Scott Peck came to when he came to those 4 stages of spirituality. Anybody in stage 2 usually, or anybody 2 stages above you, is somewhat of a threat because you don't understand them as much. So I hope if that's where you're at, you stay strong and realize that the best way to grow spiritually is to understand the hierarchy. Every culture has their own hierarchy, and guess what? It's the same. Body's at the base, the spirit's at the top. And what do? Just like Tolstoy said, we focus on the top, not realizing the importance of the foundation. Oh, but John, it's not what goes in, it's what comes out. But what do you think determines what comes out? To think that what goes in is not going to affect what comes out is just wishful thinking if you want to keep eating the wrong food and suffer. But it's but when you think of things on a grand scale, kind of excited to think of what it'd be like if not only our planet reached a tipping point, but the universe reached a tipping point. I had a daydream one time, or a lucid. It's more of a lucid dream. That's what it was. It wasn't a daydream. I know better now to describe it. It was a lucid dream. I haven't thought about this in years. I'm like, remember how it goes, and tears start pouring out my eyes when I tell the story because I remember the feeling I went through. It's already starting to happen now. Can you see it? It was so exciting. And what my dream was, and again, let me see if I can remember how it went. Somehow we reached a tipping point, and as soon as that happened, it was like all of our spirits came out of our body, and we all kind of formed a big mass above the planet, and we all came together. All the trim tabs, I should say, all the trim tabs came up, and we formed this big spirit energy that was visible, or at least by the fellow trim tabs, and we started hovering around the planet, sucking up more people as we went along, and it was so fun. Oh God, I can't believe how livid it was. Again, I'm tearing up thinking about it, because we were just circling the whole planet, just sucking everybody up, and all of a sudden, boom, in one flash, we exploded, and we took off into the galaxy and the universe, and we went around to other planets, and the next thing you know, the whole universe was in peace and harmony again. God, it was an exciting dream. And man, that was a long time ago. Man, I bet that was 17 years ago I had that dream. God, I hope that's a vision. I hope that's a vision that could come true. Could you imagine all of us trim tabs, our spirits somehow leave our bodies and we all unite going, yeah, we did it, the tipping point. We're going to get everybody up here and let's go out there and go get them. Ow! I guarantee if that day happens, the universe, woo, yeah, is in for a treat.